Good afternoon. I'm calling to order our meeting. This is the meeting of the Housing Policy and Development Committee. I'm Cam Gordon, Chair of the committee, and today I'm joined by Council Members Goodman, Ellison, and Schrader, or a quorum of the committee, and we can conduct the committee's business. Before us today, we have 3 public hearings and 3 discussion items. So no consent agenda to pass, so I think we'll go right ahead and take up our public hearings first. We have 2 land sales, and then we have a supplemental award. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if you could move item 5 above item 4 so that the applicants for these projects are not forced to sit through the report on item 4.
That's fine. I think we could do that. I think that's all right. It does look like the people who come for item 5 outnumber the people who came for item 4, so sorry to inconvenience you.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so with that change to the amendment, why don't we start with our first one, which is a land sale at 2800 18th Avenue. And
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Matthew Ramadan is at a training today, so I'm representing him in this presentation or the presentations. My name is Elfric Port. I'm the manager for residential and real estate development at CPED. I'm here to recommend the sale of 2800 18th Avenue North to Northgate Development LLC for its appraised value of $30,000. And if Northgate fails to close, staff proposes Jenny Investment in, LLC as an alternate purchaser. Excuse me. The property was built in 1926 as a 1,664 square foot, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, single-family home. The city acquired this property on November 13th, 2015, and CPED acquired it from Hennepin County as tax forfeited land. Staff marketed this property through, through the normal open house process, which includes the notification of 2,300 participants on our list served. There were 7 applications received. 2 proposals were the 2 highest ranked proposals, and those are the 2 that we're recommending today. The purchaser intends to invest $101,980 to rehabilitate as a 3-bedroom, 3-bath home for Jeffrey Law, who's a pre-approved purchaser to owner-occupy as his primary residence. The alternate purchaser proposes to invest $127,500 to rehabilitate this structure into a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, and she plans on selling it for owner occupancy, or marketing it for owner occupancy. Staff reviewed the proposals and confirmed that the proposals, both proposals meet the minimum standards of the program, and the neighborhood was notified. The neighborhood organization recommended 3 of the 7 proposers. After our evaluation, none of the 3 proposers met on the minimum requirements or was competitive in the scoring process. Therefore, we decided to proceed with the recommendations that we're bringing forth today. The developer, James Tipples, is in the audience, and if you have any questions of me, but he also has some comments if you so choose.
All right, thank you very much. I don't see any questions. This is a public hearing, though, so I think I'll open the public hearing to see if anybody wants to make a comment. And feel free to come up. If you just want to maybe introduce yourself and tell us your plans, that would be nice.
Mr. Chair, Council, very much so appreciative of the opportunity to work with the city of Minneapolis to improve my neighborhood of North Minneapolis. So given this opportunity, we'll for sure make sure that we deliver on it. Thank you.
We appreciate that. Seeing no one else coming forward, then I'll close the public hearing. And I will move approval of the sale of the property at 2800 18th Avenue North. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. That motion carries then. And now a land sale at 1405 16th Avenue North.
Yes, this is a property where staff recommends the sale of the vacant lot at 1405 16th Avenue North to Vision LLC for its appraised value of $10,800, subject to conditions. Staff further recommends an approval of up to $20,000 of homebuyer incentive funds to Michael and Carmien Foster, who plans to owner occupy the home upon completion. Excuse me. The sale is consistent with the City Council approved Minneapolis Homes and Home Buyer Incentive Program. This will be the 6th home buyer incentive project approved through this program. The subject property was acquired on March 1st, 2013 from Hennepin County as tax forfeited land. Staff has continuously marketed the property on the program's website and through a listserv of now over 2,300 participants. This is the only application that was received, and the purchaser intends to invest $280,000 to build a 5-bedroom, 3-bath, single-family home. Staff reviewed the proposal and confirmed it meets the minimum requirements. The neighborhood was notified, and they made a recommendation to the developer that they add some additional windows on the west end of the property. Both the developer and homeowner are supportive of the neighborhood's recommendations and will incorporate said changes. Are there any questions?
I don't see any questions. Thank you very much.
Right. In the audience, the developer and the home buyer are also here.
Well, let's consider this the time to open the public hearing then, and welcome. If you want to tell us a little bit more about what your plans are, now's the time.
Bruce Barron with Vision LLC. I've been before the group before, although there's some new faces. It's good to see you. Carmian Foster is with me. We're excited right near North High School to put up a very substantial new built home. As was described, finished basement. There are 7 kids in the family. And we've talked about such little aspects as how to turn the garage so that you can put a basketball hoop up and do those kinds of things. Carmian and Michael have been fantastic in working together really for nearly a year in the planning and development process. So this isn't going to be a bare bones vinyl sided 15-year tabbed roof. We're looking at a very high quality building that is deserving not only of the north side, but of Carmian, Michael, and the family. So we're really thrilled to welcome them to the north side. And I know they're anxious to get in the ground and get this built as rapidly as possible. So I'd like to introduce Carmian to the council.
Hi, Carmian Foster. My husband, Michael, and I are long-term Northsiders. We own a property at 34th and Fremont, which we have reinvested in the community to start a nonprofit serving the youth of the neighborhood. And we look forward to continuing our ties and connections to North Minneapolis by reestablishing our primary residence there as well.
Wonderful. Sounds fantastic. Make sure you get that basketball hoop right. That can be really key
We'll get her down.
to a happy family life.
The twins are insistent upon it. So.
Okay.
Any questions?
I don't see any questions. Thank you very much. So
Thank you.
I guess I'll move approval of the land sale at 1405 16th Avenue North. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Say no. That motion carries. Then we have a third public hearing, and this has to do with a supplemental award and bond issuance for the Hook and Ladder Apartments project. And we'll have a presentation from Ms. Skildum. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Arlene Robinson is also out of training today, so I'm standing in for her to do this presentation. My name is Angie Skildum. I am the manager of residential finance at CPED. This agenda item is in the public hearing portion of the agenda today because of the request for $15.9 million in housing revenue bonds for Hook and Ladder Apartments located in Ward 1 at 2318 Jefferson Street Northeast. Hook and Ladder will be the new construction of 118 units of affordable housing, 108 of which will be workforce housing units at 60% of the area median income, and 10 units will be for large families at 30% of the area median income, which is a new addition to the project since its original trust fund was awarded last year via the inclusion of 10 project-based assistance units from Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. The project is comprised of 2 5-story buildings that will have a series of special sustainability and energy efficiency features, which will give us a unique opportunity to sort of compare our Minnesota Green Communities normal energy efficiency standards to another building standard, which is known as Passive House. The total development cost of this project is just over $30 million. And in addition to the City Affordable Housing Trust funds already approved, the project contains funding from the Metropolitan Council, Hennepin County, and also a significant capital contribution from the neighborhood group, which is the Holland neighborhood. With final approval of bonds today and with the contingency award that I'll discuss briefly shortly, this project will be positioned to close in June and start construction. So speaking of that contingency pool award, the second part of the request today to the council committee is for a $675,000 final award to the project that comes in combination through the Family Housing Initiative and the city approved, council approved contingency pool. Chair Gordon, would you like me to describe that portion of the request now as well and then open the public hearing afterwards?
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds good.
So I briefly mentioned that new to the project since its original trust fund approval is the inclusion of 10 project-based vouchers in large bedroom, 3-bedroom units in this property to serve families coming out of homelessness at 30% of AMI. Those units make this project eligible for the Family Housing Initiative, which is a special set aside of funding within the trust fund that allows a $50,000 a unit contribution for families that are coming out of homelessness at 30% of AMI in 3-bedroom units. So that is $500,000 of the request for those 10 units. And then the final $175,000 award is being proposed out of the council-approved contingency pool, which you've seen a couple of requests for recently, but as a reminder, is a special set-aside that the council approved that allows final awards to close final gaps in projects in the range of $5,000 to $10,000 a unit on average. In this case, it's $1,600 a unit in additional funding through the contingency pool. Again, that will be the final amount needed to close, and I can stand for any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions, but maybe you could just articulate one more time. The public hearing is just on the portion that has to do with the 15 million and its final approval of.
Yes, final approval for the housing revenue bonds.
Okay. Thank you very much. And seeing no questions, then I'll open the public hearing and see if anybody is here today to speak on this matter. Seeing no one coming forward, then. Nope. I will close the public hearing then, and I will move approval of this item, these two action items, approving the additional funding from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, as well as the final resolution authorizing approval of the issuance of the tax-exempt multifamily housing entitlement bonds. Any questions? Seeing none, then all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. That motion carries. And then that will bring us to item 5, actually, which is the applications for the grant funding for the 2018 Metropolitan Council Livability's Community Demonstration Account, and also the Transit-Oriented Development Grant Round. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Shalonda Holmes, and I'm a Senior Project Coordinator in Multifamily Housing Policy and Development. I'm before you today to request the committee to authorize submission of priority rank grant applications to the Metropolitan Council Livable Communities Account for LCDA and LCDA TOD grant programs. Every year, the City Council considers the submission of LCDA and LCDA TOD pre-applications to the Metropolitan Regional Council. This year, we received a total of 11 applications, and the Metropolitan Council only accepts 6 applications per city, and that's 3 applications per program. The review for this program is made up of a team of city staff members from CPED divisions, as well as Public Works and Finance. This year, based on the Metropolitan Council evaluation criteria, the 6 projects listed in the report are being recommended for submission. The full application process for the LCDA and LCDA TOD program is very competitive, and projects have to compete with other projects within the region. The projects before you are the priority rank projects based on the Metropolitan evaluation criteria. So I'm open to any questions if there are any.
Do any committee members have any questions? I don't see any questions. Any comments? All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will move approval then of the applications going forward to the Metropolitan Council. Any questions on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. That motion carries then. And now we'll move on, going back to our fourth item, which is our report on Heading Home Together, Minnesota's 2018 to 2020, I think, or the agenda I have left off a numeral. Action plan to prevent and end homelessness. And we're fortunate to have Kathy Tenbrook here with us to make a presentation. And probably was very involved in this. And if I could remember Kathy's official title, I'd give it. But you're definitely helping to staff the Minnesota Interagency Council on Homelessness.
Yes,
Are you the director?
to be here. I am the director of the Office to Prevent and End Homelessness at the state of Minnesota.
Thank you. Welcome. Glad
Thank
to have
you.
you here.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And I was just thinking, I haven't stood at this podium in many, many years, so it's nice to be back. I'm delighted to be here, and I also want to thank all of you for your personal and collective leadership on housing stability. I was just at an event last night at YouthLink for the launching of their Downtown View with Councilmember Bender and Goodman and the mayor and others, and that's a tremendous example of that kind of leadership. So just very delighted. You also have an amazing housing staff, which I think you know, but it's the envy of many, many cities in the state. I have been asked, Councilmember Gordon asked me to just give a very quick update on the statewide plan to prevent and end homelessness, Heading Home Together. And then Mikkel Beckman, who's the housing coordinator at Hennepin County, is here to help answer questions about local efforts that are aligning with the Heading Home Together plan. So very quickly, just as by way of background for those of you who are less familiar with the work at the state, I direct the Minnesota Interagency Council on Homelessness, which is made up of commissioners of these 11 state agencies, the governor's office, and the chair of the Met Council. And they are really the drivers of the policy and programs related to preventing and ending homelessness at the state level. We, over the course of these years since I've been there, have launched 3 iterations of a Heading Home plan. The first one was launched in January of 2014 to help guide the state's work for a couple of years. It was updated for 16 and 17. But what we are doing now is something a little bit different, where the state has really reached out to partners, literally thousands of partners across the state of Minnesota, to collectively write and establish goals and strategies and actions related to implementing a statewide multi-sector effort to prevent and end homelessness, and that's what you have in front of you called Heading Home Together. I don't have to tell you, of course, about the challenges in our housing market for people in order for them to afford housing, but I can tell you that despite some of those very significant challenges, we have seen some progress on preventing and ending homelessness in Minnesota. It's not by accident. These are because of very strategic, very targeted efforts by a lot of talented people all across the state, including folks here in Minneapolis and Hennepin who have really been driving down the numbers of families experiencing homelessness significantly. So you see on this graph, since we launched the plan, Heading Home Plan in 2014, there's been an 8% overall decrease in homelessness in the state, and a 20% decrease in family homelessness, which I believe, and Mikkel can help with this, is about the 5th largest decrease in the country on family homelessness. So some very good news there. We also, you're probably more familiar with this good news, we have seen some significant progress on ending veteran homelessness. 4 regions of our state, the areas you see in green, have actually been confirmed by the federal government as having met all the criteria to prevent and end homelessness in their communities, which is not an easy task. submitting lots of data to show that they can prevent veterans from becoming homeless. And if a veteran does become homeless, they have a system in place to rapidly assess their needs, get them connected to housing, and help keep them there. So this is great. It's 46 of our 87 counties. And we have a veteran registry that we use to identify veterans and quickly try to connect them to housing. And at this point, at latest count, about 191 veterans remain on that registry. I will say that many of those are in the city of Minneapolis. And so there's significant work going on with folks in Hennepin County, the Minneapolis Hennepin County office to prevent and end homelessness to really target those veterans as well.
Can I just ask, would there be
Yeah.
veterans who aren't on the registry? And is that some automatic? That they
No,
would
it's a
put on?
voluntary, good question. It's a voluntary registry. So any veteran, we work very hard to identify them in every region of the state. Lots of opportunities to ask questions of people to see if they've ever served in the U.S. service. And if they have, they're asked if they'd like to be a part of the registry, which essentially just means they give permission for community partners to talk to each other and figure out what they're eligible for, what resources are available. And if they're not eligible for those resources, what other creative solutions we can put in place to get them connected to housing. It's been really effective at speeding up our housing outcomes for veterans.
And out of the 191, you said, I forgot what you said exactly, but many would be living in the Twin Cities. Do we have any idea how many are in Hennepin County or in Minneapolis?
97.
97.
So 97 veterans identified in Hennepin, 44 without a housing plan, which means that many of them have a housing plan, but one of the challenges is the connection to landlords and making sure that we can, provide the opportunity for them to get into the unit, which incentives are in place to help with that as well.
Thank you.
There are a couple of big areas of challenge, however, so there is some good news. There's lots of challenging news as well. This is also not unfamiliar to you, but we have seen a pretty alarming increase in unsheltered homelessness throughout the state of Minnesota, certainly in Hennepin County and Ramsey County. This is also a trend nationally. So this is not just us, but is something that we're really concerned about. And so, this is something that we're thinking, in addition to, obviously, we need to have an appropriate crisis response for anybody who's in an unsafe situation. It's really, we think, a major indicator of the lack of housing opportunities available for people in our state at the very lowest incomes, and especially for people that have other significant barriers to accessing housing.
So do we make the assumption when we look at this that there aren't enough shelter spaces for people, or people prefer not to utilize them and they're finding alternative means like the light rail system or something because it's more desirable to them?
So these are statewide numbers, what you see up here. So I can guarantee you that throughout the state of Minnesota, there is certainly a lack of shelter opportunities for people. And while that one of our principles of our Heading Home Together plan is that we want to ensure there's appropriate crisis response, we also very much know we could not build enough shelter to address our housing situation. We need to make sure we're developing housing that's truly appropriate and affordable for people with an appropriate crisis response, which may sometimes be shelter. In other instances, it may be another kind of crisis response. For young people, it might be host homes or other opportunities to connect people to safety. And another trend we're seeing, 18 to 24-year-olds are one of the fastest growing populations of people experiencing homelessness in the state. This is also true. We're seeing this rise nationally. It is also true we're doing a much better job of identifying young people. It's become a priority nationally to do that and to make sure we're connecting those young people to resources. So they may be better numbers, but they're certainly more accurate numbers, and also an area for us to keep our eyes on. I'm going through all of this quickly because I want to get to the solutions and the plan in place, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background. This document is a lot of numbers, so I apologize, and something you can really look at later. But the reason I put it up is that the governor has a task force on housing that's looking at the gaps in affordability in housing that we have. And this was an analysis done by Minnesota Housing, the housing department at the state, to look at where our housing opportunities are versus the housing, the incomes of the housing, incomes of the households in Minnesota. And you can see from this that, while we have maybe over 7,400 people a night who are literally experiencing homelessness, if you go down to the far right corner, you can see that over 260,000 Minnesotans are housing cost burdened, meaning they're spending more than they can afford on their housing. And if you go up to the top right corner, you can see that the largest percent of those is in the very lowest income households. Many partnerships have been built, certainly in Minneapolis, certainly in Hennepin County, and all across the state to help us do this work. I think one of the most significant ones has been with our philanthropic community. We've had philanthropic partners for many years who have been dedicated to this work of housing stability and preventing and ending homelessness, but we have about a dozen now that are deeply engaged in this Heading Home Together plan. They have committed resources and leadership support to helping to build this into a broader multi-sector effort, and they are called the Heading Home Minnesota Funders Collaborative, chaired by the Pohlad Foundation. So in order to build this multi-sector effort, working with local communities in every region of the state, we worked with tribal partners, philanthropic partners, continuums of care, faith communities, people with lived experiences of homelessness, providers themselves. We wanted to come up with a plan that was no longer a state government plan that state agencies would alone try to implement, but rather something that everyone could see themselves in and find their role and help in accelerating our progress on homelessness. So the vision of the plan in front of you is housing stability for all Minnesotans. That has not changed over the years. The four main goals are to finish the job of ending veteran homelessness, finish the job of ending chronic homelessness, that's people who've been homeless a long time and also have a disability, prevent and end homelessness for youth and young adults, and prevent and end homelessness among families with children. When we talk about ending homelessness, I always think it's really important to talk about what we mean. So for example, when we say we've ended veteran homelessness in 4 regions of the state, what does that really mean? Does it mean that no veteran will ever again be seen in those communities as experiencing homelessness? And the answer is no. It does not mean there will no longer be a housing crisis that somebody might go through. But what it does mean is that communities have organized themselves to be able to prevent that housing crisis from leading to homelessness whenever possible. And if that individual or family does become homeless, there is a system in place that can quickly assess their needs, get them connected to housing stability, and if needed, provide the kinds of supports people need to remain in that housing. And if we do that as a system and as a community, and we can prove that that is a quick and efficient way of working with people, we can essentially end homelessness in that community. So we use this graphic to show we're going to prevent new incidents, we're going to increase housing outcomes to make it more rare, we're going to make every episode as brief as we can, and then provide supports to prevent people falling back into the system again. And not only can we do it, but we can also measure it. We have a homeless management information system that actually has data that can measure each of those elements of the system. How many people become homeless the first time, total number at any one time, length of time, and then the reduction of people coming back into the system as well. So I apologize for the rapid intro of all of that, but I want to make sure I got to that so I could tell you sort of what this plan was based on and what we've learned over these years to base the plan on these principles. So Heading Home Together is organized in 2 main levels. There are 7 principles that I'll talk about really quickly. And they are essentially the main ingredients that any state, any community really needs in order to prevent and end homelessness in their community. These are based on years and years of work here and all across the nation. They're based on guidance we actually received from our federal partners at the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. And they have broad support from our partners across the state saying, yes, these are the things we need if we're going to get the job done. But then under each of those principles, we also have named in the plan what we call multi-sector strategies. So the key things that we've heard from communities all across the state need to happen in order for those principles to be realized. And those are the things that not any one entity can do alone, but we can figure out how we can partner to move those together. And then partners are coming up with their very specific individual actions that they will take to help support the strategy. So for example, at the state level, the work that I do with the Interagency Council, those 11 state agencies have identified 147 really specific actions that they are going to take to help support the strategies and actions moving forward. Other partners like philanthropy and counties are starting to look at those and develop those as well. So very quickly, here's what they are. The first one is that we have to identify and engage all people experiencing homelessness in our communities. Obviously, we cannot effectively end homelessness if we're not able to identify people. A couple of really quick examples of just a couple of the strategies that are in this principle are making sure we have reliable outreach in communities, not just the major cities, but also through other parts of the state where people are indeed also unsheltered and sleeping outside. Educate the public about homelessness, support training of natural support systems like schools and hospitals and libraries, et cetera. We need to ensure that everyone experiencing our risk of homelessness can access some form of safe and appropriate crisis response. So we can divert, we can prevent, we could provide shelter, we could provide some other appropriate crisis response, but we don't want people sleeping outside, sleeping on the trains, as I know you're all very familiar with, because these are unsafe circumstances for them. So increasing prevention and diversion, increasing that crisis response, and being creative about what that crisis response can look like, depending on the community where somebody's located. Rapidly link people to housing and services tailored to their needs. As I know all of you know well, one of the solutions to housing for people who are experiencing homelessness and have some other barriers is housing linked to services. So it might be mental health services or other kinds of services that help support people in maintaining their housing. So one of the major actions of the state, for example, is to make sure we're connecting critical mainstream services like mental health care, child care, and other services to the homeless system so that we're able to better support people in their housing. Prevent the loss of affordable housing and fill the gap of affordable and supportive housing opportunities. Obviously, this is a major area of this work. It really should be number one in many ways. The reason people are experiencing homelessness is that they cannot afford a place to live. This is where cities and counties and states and others obviously play a very big role in filling this gap. The governor has a task force on housing, and our first recommendation in this, under this principle, is to use that task force to help identify statewide what that gap is and provide recommendations to fill it. Certainly need to preserve the housing stock that we do have that's affordable. We need to have incentives for landlords to work with people that may have barriers to renting in the existing market, and increase services and supportive housing. Person-centered, trauma-informed housing first orientation to homelessness. I'm going to go through these a little more quickly. Help people experiencing at risk of homelessness increase their employment and income. This is obviously another key area of work that I know cities can certainly play a role in and have. We aren't going to be able to just build our way out of this. We need to increase people's incomes to afford housing. And so many strategies related to aligning our employment systems and our homeless and housing systems, increasing the number of families getting access to childcare, affordable transportation options, those kinds of strategies. And then finally, organize plans and partnerships to increase system capacity to prevent and end homelessness on an ongoing basis. So this is all about how do we all work together? How do we align our work at all levels of government and the private sector, philanthropy, providers? And this is where I think this plan holds some pretty exciting opportunities for us in the way that we implement it. And the last thing I'll say before I bring Mikkel up is that this is just a graphic that shows you how we, all on one page, what's in this plan. But we have a new entity that's forming called the Heading Home Together Leadership Circle. It is co-chaired by the POLAD Foundation and the Commissioner of Minnesota Housing. So Susan Bass-Roberts, president of the POLAD Foundation, and Mary Tingerthal, Commissioner of Housing, working together and bringing all of those sectors around the same table to look at this plan, identify what unique opportunity and role each of those sectors can play in helping to increase our collective impact on the work. So, and with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mikkel, because Mikkel can really talk more locally about the work already underway in Minneapolis and Hennepin County that is aligned with this and opportunities as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.
Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. Mikkel Beckman, I work for Hennepin County as the housing coordinator in the housing stability area. I'm filling in for David Hewitt, who is your and our community's director of the Office to End Homelessness. He's in Washington, D.C., representing us at the National Leadership Council for the National Alliance to End Homelessness. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of local activities. We really are in alignment around this basic framework, both population-wise and with the principles that Kathy identified. And I'll just give a couple examples under each or most of these principles. We really are doing a good job of identifying and engaging folks, I think. We are launching an unaccompanied homeless minors pilot, thanks to our State Department of Human Services. And we will have new navigators taking referrals and involving child protection in some of the work to prevent and end homelessness among older minors, 16 and 17-year-olds who normally don't fall under the same sort of scope of services that younger children get from our child welfare system locally. In addition, we've recently been able to add culturally specific street outreach staff from the American Indian Community Development Corporation, thanks to a state grant. And so we have a couple of outreach workers engaging with people experiencing street homelessness and chronic homelessness from the Native American community. We also, as Kathy mentioned, are making great progress on ending veteran homelessness. I would just add to what's already been mentioned. We just received 26 new federal VASH vouchers to add to our complement. These are lifetime housing subsidies that were created under the Obama administration and Congress several years back. And our city has been really good at utilizing those, and we keep getting rewarded with additional VASH vouchers because of that. So we do have 44 veterans left on our registry without a housing plan, and hopefully these 26 will help in that effort. I'm hoping we can basically get to functional zero sometime over the winter and be one of the communities in Minnesota that has effectively ended veteran homelessness. We're also launching a similar by name list and case conferencing for youth experiencing homelessness, following on both the veteran homelessness effort as well as the ending chronic homelessness initiative we have. We launched that last June, and we have now successfully housed 120 individuals who meet the definition of long-term homelessness. Under crisis response, we're trying to get upstream. We launched, my office launched an eviction prevention pilot in North Minneapolis, which, as you know from the city's own eviction study, is really ground zero for high eviction rates. And so we're working in partnership with McKnight Foundation and North Point Health and Wellness Center, legal aid, and some of the mediation services in town to try and both provide some emergency rental assistance to prevent evictions, but also then connect people to the right training and education. We're also launching a new diversion pilot in partnership with Catholic Charities. And of course, we have our new Adult Shelter Connect program, providing a single point of entry into the shelter system. One of the unintended consequences, I think, and one of the reasons we're seeing such higher numbers in our single adult system versus the family system, is that before the Adult Shelter Connect program, we used to get about 6 new people a day on the single adult side entering our shelter system. Since the launch of the Adult Shelter Connect program, we're seeing upwards of 15 new people a day trying to access shelter. So we've made it more simplified to access shelter and easier for people to do. And so I think one of the unintended consequences is we're getting more people coming in requesting shelter. Now, that doesn't also mean there aren't other factors related to what's going on with the housing crisis and the income disparity crisis we're experiencing. But it may be surprising for you to know that one of the reasons our shelter system is at capacity, we have 1,600 shelter beds in our community, which is a lot compared to many communities. On the single adult side, the people who are staying longest in shelter are actually the working men in the higher ground pay for stay shelter. These are men who are employed, but they're staying in shelter for very long periods of time because they're not able to access the housing market because they have histories. They have criminal histories. And it really strikes to sort of the racial disparity issue in gap in housing access. And it also, I think, strikes at the heart of common property management practices, which tend to screen out people with barriers and histories. And so even though we have men with incomes, they're sitting in shelter. We just did a series of listening sessions with these men, and they would love to get into the apartments that they've applied for. They spend a lot of their money actually on application fees and trying to apply, and are continually screened out. And so something locally we really need to look at as a community is, can we move towards more inclusive property management practices that screen people in and account for them, their barriers, especially when we're committing funding to building new units of housing dedicated for people who've experienced homelessness. And are staff really looking at and scrutinizing some of those practices? So something to look at and something to mention. A couple of other things I think I want to point out. One really great success that falls under the rapidly linking people to housing and services. It was the 100-day challenge for homeless youth that we all participated in last year. And I want to call out a city staff person, Teresa Harold, who's in your employment area. She was an amazing leader on that 100-day challenge and was a great partner with the community and the county. And we were the only community in this nationwide challenge to add employment to our goal. Not only did we want to house 150 homeless youth, we wanted to employ them, and we exceeded our goals. And I have to say that getting frontline staff in a room together, it was sort of a cross-cultural experience of workforce people, housing and homeless experts, and others. And, you know, we kept the suits and skirts out of the room, sort of the leadership, and let the frontline staff come in. And they really, together, just problem solved and moved things forward. And it taught us a lot about how we can work across sectors together as a community. And I think that example is going to bear many fruit in our correctional and child welfare and healthcare systems and with our housing folks. So I just wanted to call that out as a real success. And that work will continue. A couple of other things. Kathy mentioned the reduction in family homelessness, and we are experiencing the lowest numbers in our family shelter system maybe in the last 10 years, definitely since 2011. Last night we had 109 families vouchered into our shelter system. In 2014 at this point, same point in time, we had 240 some families in shelter. We do have a much, I think, more organized system on the family side, and it's been more organized for a longer period of time. I would say our coordinated entry on the family side is working really well. We're just getting it up and running on the single side, and so we really need to focus on that single adult side. We can, you know, there's a debate that needs to happen about what should be the capacity of our shelter system for singles, and should we invest in more shelter, or should we try to lower the length of stay? We know that half the people who stay in our single adult shelter stay less than a week and we never see them again. But it's the 5 to 10 to 15% who stay for many, many months who consume vast numbers of shelter beds. And if we can do something about that smaller number, we would free up a lot of shelter beds. That's not happening right now. So we need to look at that. And I think as policymakers, you need to have that conversation, if you haven't already, about what is an appropriate size for our single adult shelter system. We know right now we don't have enough. We know there's a lot of people sleeping outside and on the trains. So I think that's something to really look at. So want to highlight just a couple more things and then I'll stop. I've got a whole laundry list. We could be here for hours. I think there's a lot of great work happening locally. Housing stability is the goal. Right? We can talk about ending homelessness, but really what we should do is stop talking about ending homelessness, and we should start talking about the vision of all of our citizens having housing stability. There's only two ways to make the math work, and you've probably heard me say this before. You can lower the cost of housing, which we try to do with providing subsidized units and building housing for people at 30% and below area median income. But then we also have to be about income building and getting more money in people's pockets to help them go compete in the housing market. And so we need to bring our employment and job training folks together with our housing folks, because the housing folks don't naturally, and shelter folks don't think about as much about the income building piece. 80% of the adults in our shelter system are not disabled, not bound for a supportive housing unit. They need to figure out how to get more money in their pockets, and we need to help them do that and connect them to resources and job training and job opportunities in order for them to be able to go out and join the rest of us in our search for affordable housing while still trying to build more units at the lowest end. And there's a couple of efforts that are underway to do that that I won't go into great detail on right now, but we really are trying to do this cross-cultural, bringing these sectors together to have a bigger impact. We launched the nation's first ever rapid rehousing and employment pilot for youth. We're looking at how to use federal WIOA dollars, which the city of Minneapolis receives, and tie that into housing opportunities. So I think there's some opportunity there. So I'll stop there because, like I said, I could just go on and on.
There may be other questions. I have a question I wanted to ask too. And this had to do with the working men in the shelters who can't find housing. And I know that's definitely something we're working on here about rental licenses and how you can access that. But what roughly, what kind of rents could they afford to pay?
Well, I think for the singles, they could afford $600 to $900. Some are a little bit, or not earning as much now. Some people's earning potential is capped because they're in shelter.
Sure.
But
would any of them be are seeking a rooming house situation that might even have
potentially,
lower
I
rents?
think at this point, people would be open to all kinds of ideas. I think what they typically do is they go through the same search procedures that many of us go through, using Housing Link and others and applying.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Schrader has a question too.
Oh, sure. First, just want to thank you for your continued work. I know both have been just amazing, just to kind of how you're focused and how I love the move to data. And I just want to compliment you on that. And I think just looking at the numbers, where we've been able to go with families as well as veteran homelessness, like it's no surprise how we got there. We dedicated resources. We did so over time. I mean, we did so in working with federal government and others. But that also, those are very specific groups, and we're in a very different climate now. So I guess my question is, with kind of the funding looking down the line, like who's falling through the cracks, and what is kind of being done about that?
Well, I can answer locally, and you could give a statewide response if you'd like, Kathy. We had 50 on the single adult side, which is, let's focus there because that's where the demand is right now. We had 5,600 roughly single adults, unique individuals, use our shelter system last year. 94% of them had incomes far below the 30% area median income level. So really, at the end of the day, this is about people with tremendously low incomes. We have a variety of folks within that group: senior citizens who have no savings, people in their 50s and 60s who are having trouble accessing the job market, younger disabled people, people who have grown up without any experience of having stable housing or employment. But really, it's about, for a lot of people, income and just the lack of units available at 30% and below area median income. And the local gap, I believe, is 60 or 36,000. It's in the slide presentation I sent earlier, but I don't have that in my head. But it's large. We have a large gap. I think it's great that there's a proposal from the mayor's office to really boost the affordable housing trust fund amounts and to focus on 30% area median income. I would say that you can prioritize 30% and below, but you may or may not get proposals from the development community because it's really challenging without ongoing operating subsidies. So unless you really say we're kind of mandating 30% and below, you may or may not get the number of units you want, or somehow figuring out a partnership with either Minneapolis Public Housing or some other entity to provide some of that. Because again, if the market could produce those units, they would. It's just without that, ongoing support, it's really challenging. So that's the piece to figure out. I think you've been really creative around expanding the notion of what constitutes, people being able to live together, the communal living ordinance that was passed, the rooming house ideas, things like that. I think we've got to get really creative if we're going to solve this problem until we can get incomes boosted. So.
Thank you. Council President Bender, and welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I was a bit late. I also wanted to highlight how much the data that's coming from the coordinated entry shift is helping us understand the dynamics that you talked about in terms of particularly the single adults and how we're going to better serve all of these different populations. And I think I have had the opportunity to serve on the board of Heading Home Hennepin since I took office. And I've seen over even that short period of time how that data is helping us understand the single adult population, the needs of the youth in our shelter system, the fact that we have a significant population of aging seniors that have more and more health issues. And so I think our shelter system needs approaches that are aligned with the populations that we're trying to serve. And that sounds like an obvious statement, but now we have the data to help us understand what those needs really are. So I think that's really important. I also want to say a couple of other things. The first is that we're working on a lot of policies around housing stability as a city. And I think it's really exciting. This council is really digging in and working on renter issues and on our comprehensive plan, which has become there's a couple of items in that draft plan that have become a bit of a flashpoint, but I think overall the council is moving in the direction of wanting to just have some evolve in terms of having more housing options in neighborhoods across the city. And I actually think there's a lot of alignment about that general direction, and maybe we just need to get on the same page on the specifics. But the piece that I'm the most concerned about is when we're talking about funding for homeless services and particularly for building new housing and preserving housing. I'm concerned that the city of Minneapolis has such a high population of cost-burdened households, and that our primary tool for raising funds for affordable housing is property taxes. My ward is 80% renter, and the older buildings in my ward are seeing giant increases in property tax values already that are being passed on to renters, which are exacerbating rising housing costs. And that's happening in my ward, but it's happening across the city. And so I just wanted to highlight that, like, anytime someone gives me a microphone and we're talking about housing, and appreciate so much the work that you're doing at the state. I know that the climate right now for state funding for housing is challenging, but there's a huge coalition of people working to build support for the funding that we really need at the state level, because this is not just an issue in Minneapolis. I mean, I was on the NPR show the other day, and there were people calling in from all over the region, and even cities that don't have particularly good reputations in terms of wanting to welcome affordable housing, saying we need affordable housing here too. And that's just, I mean, you know this, I'm not saying anything and anyone doesn't know. And then for me, here we are situated in Hennepin County, and the partnerships that we have with the county on social services and on the economic development and jobs creation piece are so important. And I think we need to continue to evolve that partnership on the funding side too, and look for ways that the county can help support funding countywide for affordable housing production and preservation. Because again, here in Minneapolis, we have a concentration of cost-burdened households, and I welcome ideas about different kinds of funding mechanisms that we could use that aren't property taxes. But as we continue to rely on property taxes, there has to be a balance there of where we're, making the problem worse that we're trying to solve. So that's my little speech. You can respond or not. I also just want to thank you for your work, and the partnership with the county and with the state is so important to us at the city.
Yeah, I think that having housing finance discussions with the county and other entities, the Met Council and others, would be great. I would love to see a housing finance, interjurisdictional housing finance conversation happening. Maybe it's happening already with our wonderful housing finance experts at the city and at the county and other places. But I think there's, other communities that are struggling with the same issue because it's a national issue, are coming up with a variety of ways to find a way to fund the creation and support for affordable housing. Yeah, some are straight up, like Los Angeles. I was just out there, and they have just passed a 1/4-cent sales tax that'll generate, I think it's $2 billion a year in a big town, for the development of affordable housing over the next 15 years. Other cities and counties are looking at a variety of measures to do that. And I just think having that conversation and looking at the menu of options you have as policymakers would be great.
Well, thank you. I don't see any other comments or questions. I do want to, well, I guess I won't ask a question, but maybe you can respond to the motions that I'm going to make necessarily. Okay, it's my understanding that you're interested in getting more jurisdictions or entities involved and on the record as being aligned with this work and the principles.
Yes, right now we have dozens and dozens of entities around the state, including the Downtown Minneapolis Business Council and Association of Minnesota Counties and others, who have officially signed on to the plan, which essentially just means they would like to align their work with other partners across the region to realize these goals.
And it doesn't cost any money?
It doesn't cost any money, no. And it doesn't mean that every detail of this plan is agreed to and every action is signed off on. It simply is a statement of alignment and support to do the work together.
And through our Office to End Homelessness, we already have staff engaged and involved in this.
Absolutely.
David Hewitt's already attending.
David Hewitt actually sits on the Heading Home Together Leadership Circle, which is that multi-sector group I mentioned, along with me and others.
So it's in that spirit that the motion brought forward. There's two parts to this motion, but the first is just to authorize the city of Minneapolis to formally sign on as a partner to this Heading Home Together action plan, and expresses our general agreement with the principles and goals of it, and also that we agree to find opportunities to align our work to help end homelessness and make progress toward the vision, goals, and principles outlined in the plan. Then there's a second part of the motion. We can separate or divide these if somebody wants to on the committee here, but is a staff direction directing our CPED staff to identify specific actions the city of Minneapolis is taking consistent with this action plan, and also recommend further actions we could take to be aligned more closely with its goals and particular strategies. So I'll move those two items. Councilmember Schrader.
I just have a friendly amendment on the second motion where you talk about this staff direction, having the city of Minneapolis taking consistent actions with the action plan. After the and recommend future actions, I before including outcomes to measure. I think one of the powers of this plan is the action plan is really the measurements, and I wanted to just make sure that what we're measuring is lined up with the action plan.
I think that sounds fine and it's consistent. I'm not exactly sure where you inserted the word, so we have to make sure that the clerk understands it. Yeah. Okay. So does everybody understand clearly the motion and the amendment that I'll just incorporate in there, which is to identify some measurable outcomes, I guess. All right. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you very much for all this work and the presentation. It's great to see you again.
Thank you. Very
And
good to
let's
see you
stay
too.
in touch. Same to you, Michael. Thank you for being here. We have one more item on the agenda, and this is the, at least for one of us up here, the long-awaited resolution establishing a Minneapolis Advisory Committee on Housing. And I believe we'll have a brief presentation just about a little bit focused on how the proposal has changed a bit from the recommendation we got from our Public Health Advisory Committee several weeks ago. Ms. Brennan, welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Andrea Brennan, Director of Housing Policy and Development for the city. On March 23rd, the City Council received and filed a report from the Public Health Advisory Committee recommending the establishment of a Housing Advisory Committee, and also approved a staff direction to the Departments of Community Planning and Economic Development, Regulatory Services, and the Health Department to return to the Housing Policy and Development Committee with a draft resolution to create a Minneapolis Advisory Committee on Housing. So that is what we're here to do today. Noah Schuckman with Regulatory Services is also here. So the resolution that is before you establishes the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on Housing. The purpose of this committee is to advise the departments of CPED, Community Planning, Economic Development, Regulatory Services, Health, and the Sustainability Division of the City Coordinator's Office, as well as the City Council regarding matters related to housing policy and development, rental licensing, and other areas which affect the accessibility, maintenance, development of stable, quality, sustainable, healthy, and affordable housing in the city of Minneapolis. The role of the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on Housing will include serving as liaisons between the city and the community in addressing housing concerns, as well as proactively engaging the community around these issues. The committee is proposed to be comprised of no more than 21 members, including 12 resident members, with 8 to be appointed by the council and 4 to be appointed by the mayor. This group of residents should reflect the racial, ethnic, geographic, and gender diversity of Minneapolis and include the perspectives from renters, homeowners, persons who have experienced homelessness, including youth through age 24, rental property owners, advocates for affordable housing, greater housing supply, renters' rights, sustainability, and health and housing, and other issues related to housing. So in addition to the 12, there would also be 9 representatives of organizations and entities that work on housing affordability, creation, preservation, and management, issues, including a representative from one of the following organizations, which I will list. The Hennepin County Continuum of Care Operating Committee of Heading Home Hennepin, Minneapolis Public Schools, the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, an organization that provides emergency or overnight shelter services in Minneapolis, an organization that advises and advocates for renters, a nonprofit community development organization, an organization that advocates for rental property owners, an organization that helps support homeownership and the elimination of racial disparities in homeownership rates, and finally, an organization that works for equity in housing, especially as it relates to preventing involuntary displacement of low-income communities of color. The committee is proposed to be staffed by the Community Planning, Economic Development, Regulatory Services, and Health Department. It will deliver an annual report to this committee and otherwise the committee will function as all committees do in the city.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Who's going to do all this work? I mean, you're going to bring 21 people together to discuss what and where, and so our staff is now not going to do the long list of things that we have them doing, because they're going to be spending the first 5 months bringing everybody up to speed on what the current policies are, and then a couple months talking about all the proposed policy changes. And housing's a complicated issue. I mean, who's going to do all this staff work? Are you, as the chair, is the chair going to be proposing new staff people in the housing division and the reg services division to be dealing with this? Because our staff, as I understand it, can barely keep up with the work that we're doing without any additional staffing. So I'm just wondering how this is going to be staffed. Who's going to produce this report? Are we asking our staff to produce a report from a committee to us? How's that going to work? And how will that feed into all of the other things that we're doing? Wouldn't you rather spend money on housing than more staff to report to more people?
That's a question for me.
Maybe what?
I'm not sure if that was a rhetorical question or if that's a question for me. I mean, staffing is certainly something that came up at the work groups when we talked about it already, and we do have some staff who are available to put in some time, but actually we've gotten an investment to coordinate that effort between the 3 different departments, and they're discussing that right now. This is something that we do with many advisory committees, so you're right, take some staff time when they make an annual report, and we have annual reports that come up to other committees, but it also, we have a lot of work that goes into it from the committee. It's actually my hope that we're going to get volunteer effort out of this that's going to make things go more efficient, that's going to be clearer, that it's actually going to end up saving us some resources and time and energy, especially if we can put together an effective group and have expertise there. We're liable to land on some policies much sooner that are much more effective than if we don't have it. That might be me in my rose-colored glasses, and I'm not expecting everybody to agree with me, but I've seen it work with other advisory boards and commissions that actually help us do our work more effectively, and I'm hoping that this can help us do that too, and we'll be building an infrastructure here so that we actually have a base, and it's going to turn out that there'll be community engagement efforts, vetting efforts, outreach efforts that staff won't be doing, because committee members will be helping to do that and helping to bring those perspectives to policies in a more efficient and effective way. I don't know that we've necessarily got lined up which staff are going to put in which hours to serve the committee yet, but if you guys have that all figured out, you're welcome. But my understanding is we have 3 department directors who are willing to help find that and to staff the committee. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to interrupt if you had more to say, but I did want to note that last year in the budget, we did add 1 new FTE, which was a housing stability coordinator. And when I spoke with the mayor and the council members about that position, which I proposed, part of what I imagined this person doing was staffing this particular organization. So we do have 1 new full-time staff person specifically dedicated to housing stability. I know there's a giant list of work to do. But that was part of the argument that I was making to my colleagues when I proposed the position. It was not in the housing department. It was actually in the coordinator's office originally, because I had actually thought that they would want to do more of this kind of facilitation work, but we moved it into the housing department at the request of CPED. So I'm happy to have it there. But this was the kind of work I was imagining this staff person doing with part of their time. And again, I can turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, if you want to say more, but I would just say I agree that based on my experience, both as a member of an advisory committee and as a council member that's worked closely with a number of them, there is some startup time, but we appoint the positions. Staff typically brings us a recommendation of who they would like us to consider to put on these bodies. We usually end up with volunteers in the community who are really interested in being collaborative with staff and council members. The value added of these commissions across the city is huge. And I think in the end, staff will find, it might take some time, that it's going to make your life easier because you're going to have a group of citizens that call the council members and say, we've reviewed this and we support it. And it'll put less burden on staff to make the political case for change or for policy recommendations or for prioritization of the work program. I mean, I would offer that I think this group should be very clear about the limitations of staff time and that we should all be clear that we need to better prioritize the work and stop just piling more onto the housing staff, because I agree that that is happening. We just approved a really highly paid person in the mayor's office to support housing, so perhaps that person can help with this committee as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wholeheartedly agree with Councilmember Goodman on the concern for staff time. I think that we always need to think about that. I also think we need to think about what staffing we're doing when we're not spending that money on housing. I am, however, really supportive of this idea. I think as we look around, we are not set up as a city historically to actually solve problems. Like we just heard a report where they're very focused on outcomes and numbers. And I think as a city, we need to find new solutions that are going to allow us to do that. And right now, all the things we have, all the solutions that we have really are more than we can afford. And so I think that what I like about your committee is really bringing forth a lot of the community members to start look at other ways that we can really make tough decisions about the resources we have. I also want to thank you, and I know that you've been working a lot with the department to make this kind of a compromise so it isn't too much of a burden on staff, but at the same time reaches the goals of getting the input we need to come up with innovative solutions. Because I don't think we have those innovative solutions yet. And I hope that this committee can get us there.
All right. Thank you. I don't see any other comments or questions. Thank you. Did you want to say anything else?
Sure, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I would add that we have hired a housing policy coordinator in the housing division. We're really excited about her starting June 4th, and we expect that she will be able to spend some of her time supporting this work. The housing stability specialist that Council President Bender mentioned, we are in the process of trying to hire that position as well. And that position is focused on a number of the staff directions that came out of the August 3rd, 2017 study session. There were a lot of staff directions resulting in a lot of work that one person solely can't do. And so as well as having a person with the skill sets that have that are appropriate for the work that is being proposed for that person to do. So that position will be focused primarily on housing preservation work. We have a number of new initiatives that are focused on very precise sort of strategic interventions in trying to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. And that's like a full-time job plus. So we are anxiously trying to hire that position to help advance that work as well.
All right, thank you very much. And just lastly, I guess I'll comment that if this is approved, which I expect it will be, I hope that we'll all be thoughtful about who we reach out to just to encourage to serve on this committee. I think we do have some incredible individuals in the city of Minneapolis and in a number of agencies that are linked up to the type we're looking for. We actually went through this as a work team, I guess, after we got the recommendation, and this looks quite different from what we got from the Public Health Advisory Committee. And I think not that they didn't provide us with great work and a great start for this, but it was definitely hard the way it was configured to think we get the diversity of voices that we needed. So we did reshape it a bit into this extensively. So with that, I will move approval of this resolution establishing the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on Housing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. That motion carries. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for being here.